get the team up here. My name is George Allen, Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. I get to moderate this august panel. And so we have Matt Landers from the GSBA, Andreas over there, CBE Strategic, Craig Dawson runs an operation called Retail Lockbox and is built out some space here in Seattle. Josh McDonald, my brother in arms, is the Washington Restaurant Alliance.
Seattle Restaurant
Alliance. And then Janet Ali, one of your better neighbors at Nucor Steel. Can you maybe move over a little bit? There we go. I'm just going to introduce the concept. I think we've all sort of heard about it. And basically, there is a tremendous and sort of sweeping and comprehensive conversation here in Seattle about the potential to raise the minimum wage up to $15. This is not a conversation which is isolated to Seattle. Just south in SeaTac, they had a proposal that went through by 70 plus votes to increase the minimum wage there. There's a bit of a court concern about whether it's going to go forward or not, but it passed, along with mandatory sick leave as part of it, and a couple of other items that made it a fairly comprehensive and sweeping package. That is, it's also being debated in Olympia at the $12 level. Our own president is talking about some sort of raise to the federal standard as well. So on just about every permutation that where there is legislation, there is some look at raising the minimum wage. So say that something's going to happen. We at the Chamber have not taken a position on that. And when I go into groups, I go, well, what? I would have assumed you would have just come out saying this is the worst thing in the world and we just cannot have it. We haven't taken a position on it right now because, as I would assume many of the other business organizations are in the same boat as we, there are so many different options being discussed right now for the minimum wage approach. There is a council member who was elected at $15. That was much of what she was talking about. There is a proposal gathering signatures right now which says $15 if you talk about compensation, which can be bonuses and tuition reimbursement and a number of other things. And then there is an effort being put forward by the mayor with a number of the city council members called the Income Inequality Advisory Commission, I do believe, which sits a number of the people from the business organizations, including Janet and Craig, are both on that. My boss, Ma Dodon, a number of folks from the labor community, and some nonprofit organizer folks as well. We are looking to help that conversation, to support that conversation. One thing we appreciate about it is that it is taking its first few steps to really get data and information onto the table and discussed as part of the process. There's a lot of emotion all around this issue, and we're trying to, for now, stay with a conversation that looks at what the real picture is and what the opportunities are. So there's a solution-based conversation going on, and that's just the context that I'll set. So I would like to start off with some questions and that have been brought forward. I would guess some of these are out of my head, so some of the better questions are going to come from you all. So we'll try and get through a couple of pieces of the conversation and then open it up to the floor. And I could pass the microphone around, or you guys could scream. We can do it one of two ways. Craig's like, I will scream. So what are the pros and cons in your mind of increasing the minimum wage? We'll start with you, Jen.
I mean, I think the pros are fairly obvious. I think that most of us do understand that the minimum wage has not kept pace with the cost of living. And whereas at one time it was possible to survive, maybe not thrive, but to survive on a minimum wage job, and that isn't necessarily the case anymore. So I think the pro case is fairly easy to make. On the con side, I mean, that really comes into how you do it, you know, and that really comes into how do you go about it in a way to try to avoid some unintended consequences, because it's not as simple an issue of, oh, well, let's just pay everybody more. That may be part of a solution, but even that is not a simple prospect. There are so many variables involved that really need to be considered and understood and taken into account. And our city has the opportunity to do something truly, truly amazing. But if we don't do it in a thoughtful manner, we also have the ability to create some unintended consequences that could hurt the very people that need the help the most.
Greg?
Well, I think Janet talked about the pros to it. The pro case has really been talked about and is out there mostly in the public and what's going on. The con case, I think, again, Janet talked about unintended consequences. The folks that this will hurt the most include minorities. So you've got a situation where you've got African Americans who are graduating at really about a 75% rate. You've got Hispanics. Other folks are unskilled workers and college graduates who have a 25% unemployment rate. Again, it's really how it's going to be delivered. Today, we're only really talking about $15 an hour versus a total compensation model, which is really what I think we should be looking at. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, but really today you're only hearing the pro side to it, and business's voice hasn't been heard. So one of the reasons we're out here today is both to educate and also hear what you might think about how it's going to affect your businesses.
And on the compensation, just a demonstration, I know that with some manufacturing, Nucor perhaps, if someone is paid at a minimum wage, if there's a creative bonus system and bonus structure, they could be making up to $65,000 or $70,000 at the end of the year. So those are just parts of the conversation that we're hoping to make part of the dialogue on the city level. And Matt, you have an interesting perspective because you at the GSBA touch base with a lot of employers, and you've done a terrific job in making sure that they're communicated with and their issues are heard. What are you hearing from some of your membership?
Yeah, and so in partnership with all the neighborhood chambers, including the West Seattle Chamber and West Seattle Junction, we organized a survey for all the neighborhood chamber members, which I've already heard a couple of you in the room have taken and you've seen. We're starting to get the data back. The survey is going to close tomorrow afternoon, so if you haven't taken it, either contact me or Lynn and we can send you the link. And a lot of the concerns that Craig and Janet mentioned are what we're hearing from a lot of our members, and these are the small businesses. These are the neighborhood businesses. A lot of these businesses, they want to help their employees. They want to be fair. They want to, do right by their employees, but they recognize that policies have not quite kept up, and they want to do something about it. But very few people are saying, oh, we should do 15 tomorrow. They say, yes, we need to get up to this point. We need to decrease, the very large disparities that have opened up over the last few decades. But it needs to be done, as they said, smartly, intelligently. The problems of increasing the barriers to entry for people just starting out, for people re-entering the workplace, for workers who are already faced other difficulties in entering the workplace. The tremendous impacts that this will have on the nonprofit community, on human services, on healthcare provision, and trying to take that into account as well as broadening the discussion. What are the other ways that this problem of the high cost of living in Seattle and all that can be addressed? Are there other ways that can be done in addition to increasing the minimum wage? Are there things that can get at the problem a little better, or in addition to some of these other ways of...
Could you expand on that a little bit? I mean, what other ways have you heard that we can get to some of these issues and maybe close that opportunity gap?
And so when people look at cost of living or living wage calculations, and there's no standard definition of that, but the highest costs, and I don't think it's any surprise, are housing, healthcare, and childcare. If you're just a single adult, it's not that, most people are able to make that wage with the current minimum wage standards. As soon as you have one child, the healthcare and the childcare costs dramatically increase what you need to thrive and to just meet your basic needs. And so there are, is it increased childcare subsidies? Do we need to look at that? Childcare workers can't really increase their prices that much before they, people just can't afford it at all. And everyone agrees childcare workers should be paid appropriately for this very critical service, but suddenly can the people who need the childcare, can they afford that? for, everyone is aware of the very high cost of rent and housing in Seattle. We don't have quite enough supply to meet the demand here, and we can't do any sort of local rent control because that's been preempted by the state back in the 80s. But are there other ways we can get at it? Is there more housing assistance that we can do to impact some of these costs that are creating some of these disparities?
So I hear almost two things. I hear one is that there are costs that someone has to pay for other than just straight dollars that might be beneficial. It could be tuition reimbursement. When I had 2 kids in childcare, I was pretty much bringing home a nickel a week. Everything's going to the childcare center. Now that my kids are getting ready, hopefully to go to college, some tuition assistance would be fabulous. And so that's the sort of creativity we're hoping to bring into the conversation. Josh, you are representing probably one of the industries most in the sort of the eye of the storm here, and that's with restaurants. So there is a conversation about increasing that wage. Do you talk about tips? But I also want you to talk about the opportunities that restaurants give to those just entering the workforce and how raising the minimum wage might help or hurt that real strategy that the restaurants have put forward.
Sure. One of the things that from the restaurant industry side we're very proud of is the fact that we are a lot of times an entry-level place for people to get into the workforce, people to get their first jobs, learn how to be professionals, and then they grow from there. Whether they're coming from as teenagers to their first jobs, which is scarily declining dramatically. Over the last 10 years, our industry's lost half of our teen workforce. I mean, that's not something to just overlook. That's really concerning. You raise what it costs to bring someone on, and then you make it harder for the restaurants to be able to afford. When you're looking at someone at one wage versus another, you make certain decisions based on your investment and so forth and so on. But also, we are very proud to be an industry that helps people who come out of prison, try and get back on their feet. People coming right out of South Seattle Community College and our Culinary Arts program that we love, wanting to give those people jobs. But when you're in an industry, and any restaurateur here can tell you that this is one of the most competitive industries, period. You have your competitors on every block, and you all are in it together, but on the same level, you're competing for the same customer, a lot of the same customer base. So and again, many of them can tell you what they bring home each year, and it's not much. We on average have about 700,000-800,000 in gross sales for a restaurant, and we bring home about 4%. So if you do the math, you are a blue-collar worker owning a restaurant, owning a business. So what we're concerned about with this, among many other things, is that if you dramatically increase our labor costs and you don't find ways to do that the right way, and that's why we're a large part of this conversation is making sure we can do it the right way, then all you do is decrease our ability to give people chances, to give that first teenager a job, give that person coming out of prison or come out of a really great Pioneer Life or Pioneer Human Services or whatever it is. We're proud to take those on. I have tons of stories of people who started in one of those places and now own their own restaurant. And it's fabulous. We need more of that, not less. So, we think that this is a very, very important conversation for us to have as a community, but we got to get it right. If we get it wrong, the amount of unintended consequences could be dramatic and a very, very long list. We also, as restaurants, are somewhat unique in the fact that a lot of our, especially if you're full service, which is, we kind of think of ourselves in two places: full service, sit down, dining, you have a server. Quick service is much more of your fast food or other type of fast casual where you are ordering yourself and picking up yourself. Especially in the full service, but all the broad spectrum of it is a lot of our people work off tips. They get a okay base wage, but they make good money on tips and good money on other things that come to them other than just their base wage. And so we need to look at, as a community in the restaurant industry, what the total earned income of our employees is. Because you're cutting the conversation short, and it's shallow if you're just talking wage. You're talking about what do we each, as employers, give our employees on every paycheck, whether it's healthcare, education benefits. One of our institutions in Seattle, Dick's Drive-In, offers college assistance. That's fantastic. We should be helping people get into education, better themselves and continue on into the professional world. And they have endless stories about people they've helped do that. We need to protect those things and make sure that they're being counted and part of this conversation, or else we're very, very concerned they go away. So I think that's what you mostly
Yeah,
wanted to
pretty
know.
much. And then I have a question for you as well. I think that the illustration of what both Josh and Craig are talking about, as it was told to me by members of the IIAC, is if you have an application in your hand for a job, and it's a fairly entry-level job, and you have someone coming out of the University of Washington or the community college who's got a lot of skill sets and an education, maybe a degree, they'll take that first job at $15 to get a handle on things, get their apartment in order, move out of their mom's garage. I mean, they want to make those transitions. You have that application and that resume, and then you have someone who may have come out of Pioneer Human Services, or prison, or is somehow just had the life of hard knocks, and you have that resume there too for that same job. It makes the person from the University of Hard Knocks a little less competitive for that position, whereas now they may still be at varying levels. Andres, I want to ask you, because you are not necessarily a business owner, but I know that you have been deeply in conversations with many of the sort of the key stakeholders who are trying to create a dialogue around this, which gets away from the emotional part and can maybe get to some of the problem solving. So if you could just give us some information about what you guys are doing too.
Yeah, I think one of the cons on this is that really the business voice has really been put into a box as this is what business represents, and these are the concerns that business have. There's no room of moving forward on this issue. What we want to do is use this as an organizing opportunity for small business organizations. And in a world where small business owner and operators are by nature very reactive to policies, how do we get ahead of that and influence not the what? Because like George said, this is at the national level, this is at the state level, but we really need to be influencing the how. And how is this implemented, and how do we move forward? So how do we elevate some of the concerns at the same time in a positive solution way that really changes the conversation, that says, small businesses aren't like large corporations. We have a different value system than a Walmart, than a McDonald's, or than some of these larger chains. Small businesses care about their employees, but we're not necessarily against increasing the standards of living. We understand the economics behind it. We just want to make sure that this is done in a way that supports our businesses and that doesn't put us out of business. So I think what we're looking for is businesses who are coming at this from all right, let's work together, let's come around the table, and let's support the process. At the same time, let's organize a coalition of businesses that can move forward, which is a little bit of a different kind of conversation of how it's being portrayed in the media, in kind of broader opinion that says all business is against this.
Yeah. I think that's fair, and then I have a follow-up question for you. And to that end, most of the folks around this table, and a few out there, we're working to develop a group called One Seattle, and basically that has representation from all the sectors impacted, of which there are like 12 to 13 sectors. We're trying to get strong representation from each one of them, as well as members of the IIAC. And I will tell you one little tidbit. We pulled together a meeting of nonprofits and human service providers just 2 days ago, about 24 of them, and they're in an odd pickle. Their clients are the ones that they want to help raise up out of poverty. So they see the $15 minimum wage as a bit of that equation, but then they go to their own books and look at how raising the wages for their own workers, many of whom are in that entry-level position, might impact them. So they're understanding that to provide this raise, they'll have to cut, ironically, the very programs that are supposed to be helping their clients. So it's an odd place for them to be, but I think they'll be part of that conversation as well. Andres, I did want to ask you if you wouldn't mind commenting, or other folks commenting here. Those who are absolute proponents of this have conducted a poll, and it was released, I believe, in The Stranger this morning. It has some pretty high numbers for those who in support of this. The numbers are high. They're also similar to the numbers that happened in CTAC. Before, there was more of an education and a conversation about it. I will say CTAC is different than Seattle very much. CTAC was, here's the issue. It's a binary decision, yes or no. Got it, boom, done. Here in Seattle, there's much more of a table being set for a conversation. But I wanted to ask you, how does that change the dynamic? I mean, for the proponents who just want it, is there still room for that conversation when you see those poll numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the polls that George is referencing, released today, 68% in favor of a no phase-in immediate, January 2015 model, right? Which I think, given what the values of Seattle and the very progressive community that we live in, I think there is a inherent value of protecting small business. I think it's a makeup of how we see ourselves. So I do still think that there is a room for negotiation, but I think at the same time, it's even more important that then small businesses realize that we really need to influence the how, because the popular support is there. Granted, it's there's probably not that much education around what this means for the economics of everything, but popular support is there. With no concession. So it's even more important for small business organizations to come to the table around let's try to influence how it's implemented, and really support the process that two of the panelists here are involved in, and still reach for the compromise.
Craig, I'd like to give that to you. I forget how many employees you have here in the...
We have about 85.
85. So by some measures, you can be considered a small business, although you're thriving and growing. Congratulations.
We're a small business.
Okay, let's say if there's a cutoff, he's a small business. But you have, you monitor your payroll pretty quickly. You've been engaged in the conversation. You're a minority-owned business and a small business, and you're also on the mayor's task force. So you have a number of different hats. So how do you see this playing out, and what would be your aspiration in the conversation?
Well, from our standpoint, it really needs to be a fair process for all involved. Everybody in Seattle is going to be affected by this, whether you're the worker or the employer, small business owner, like I said, the social services or the nonprofit. Everyone's going to be affected by this. And the voice right now, even on the committee, is what's business going to do about getting to $15 an hour? What's business going to do for its employees? And there's really been a sort of mashing together of what a minimum wage is versus what a living wage is. And so they're trying to push all this. They're saying it's a minimum wage discussion, and then using all of the data around a living wage in order to push that wage up. So it's a process that business is not represented. And we are in a bit of a pickle, because what's happening is they're asking us to negotiate against ourselves. They're saying, hey, what are you going to do, business? You've got labor here, you've got the mayor, you've got the city council, and they're all looking over at business saying, you guys are an evil empire. You are not taking care of your workers. Pay for this new minimum wage. And I think what we need to do in Seattle, if you think about the head tax, the square footage tax, sick leave, Obamacare at 4%. What's happening is businesses shouldering all of this. Employers are shouldering all the burden to pay for these things. And the conversation around raising the level of prosperity really for the workers should be shared by everybody, right? So right now, all that is being shouldered by business, by us in the room, by employers. And there is no willingness from the city or the city council to say, let's give you guys a 50% B&O and decrease if you voluntarily move to a $15 an hour total compensation package. Labor's not coming and saying, hey, we'll give $1 back from our dues, and we'll make being in the unions voluntary, because if that value proposition is so great, then people would want to be in the union and be represented. So if the idea is really to have more prosperity for the workers, then we all should come to the table. It shouldn't just be a one-sided and then looking over at us. And I might add, on the mayor's committee, we're outnumbered 3-2. So already, if there was going to be a consensus we were going to vote, we would be on the losing end. And the idea is that the prevalent idea today is $15, a 62% increase today, or on January 1st of next year, and deal with that.
I'd like you all to think of some questions, but I did want to ask Janet one last question. You brought up the employees and what they want. And it was been my remembrance from the mandatory sick leave conversations that the employee's voice and what you really want really wasn't part of the conversation. is the healthcare benefit what you want? Is the sick leave what you want? Is an increase what you want? How might your employees, or just like manufacturing employees, particularly those at Nucor, might respond if said, well, what's important to you and to your family?
Well, we're hearing a lot of concerns from our employees. Our compensation model is so unusual in that the hourly base rate is only about 1/3 of their take-home pay. The other 2/3 is made up of production-based bonuses that are paid every week, real time, in their paycheck. And so the way that this would affect us is that it would fundamentally change our compensation structure, which is one of the core principles of how our company was founded and built, and has been such a key to our success of not only making a steel-making company successful in America, but ending up with the highest compensated people in the industry in the process. And the key to that is that our teammates control their own earnings because of the way that it's structured. And they're very, very concerned if you take that base rate number, which for most of them is below 15, and you change that number, then that will change the structure of that. And that means they have less control over their potential, and their potential could in fact be reduced as a result. So they're very, very concerned about this. And like I said, we have an unusual position in this because we already do achieve the outcome that the Inequality Advisory Commission is going for, in that we take people with little or no education and we train them from the ground up and we move them into living wage jobs. And so it puts us in an unusual position that we're already achieving the stated objectives, and we might lose our ability to do so.
Thank you. I also find it amazing that Nucor, the big broad-shouldered steel plant, is in an urban area, and it survives that well. Would you mind if you go ahead and comment? But if it's a show of hands, somebody might have a question on it.
Real quick,
thank you.
Real quick, I just want to add to what Andres was talking about, and Craig and others here about the poll and all that kind of stuff. Seattle's one of the most educated voting populations in the country. I really believe that we can have an educated conversation about this and work as both the business community and the employee community and the labor and social justice to figure out the right solutions. And I from work we've been doing, I understand that the majority of Seattleites feel that we should get together and figure this out together. I think they'd be less inclined if there was two polar opposites throwing things at each other, and that would be the worst case scenario for our community. So we're all in this together to try to figure out the right solutions so we can avoid such outcomes.
We have a question here. I did want to introduce Brian Surratt in the back, if you could raise your hand. He is the major cat herder in this whole dialogue. He works for Mayor Murray, and he is in charge of the inequality group that these people are a part of. So he could probably answer some questions after this as well. Thank you, Brian, for making the trip. Yes, sir.
I own a Great Clips with 7 employees, okay, and we've been open for like 4 months. I'm probably feeding about $5,000 a month into the business, right as it is, and many of these people are earning, not minimum wage, above minimum wage, but they're earning bonuses and commissions on top of that. If you increase it a minimum to 15, you're probably increasing my overhead by about $50,000 a year. And so right now, I'm at a loss position. I'm feeding the business $5,000. I'm going to be feeding it $10,000, is what you're telling me. And that's the reality of this kind of minimum wage. You're jumping it by about 60%, 55-60% from $9.32 up to $15. You're basically telling me that I may not be able to afford to operate a business in Seattle. That I've got to basically, I may not be able to keep my lease. I may have to close down and, if I can, move somewhere else outside the city, because right now I can't be, I'm not at profit. I'm not even at break even yet. So it just makes it much harder. I'm just going to say no other issues. I started out when I was 12, 13. I started out at $1 an hour, and I don't know what the minimum wage back then was, probably $1.25. But I started at $1 an hour because I wanted to work, and I was willing to work. I was willing to work full time in the summers because I wanted the money. Okay. And I needed the money. I wanted the money because I wanted to buy my own things. But listen, I lived in a household where my dad worked at Boeing, was part of the IAM 751, and he was a major breadwinner. I was there to earn money for myself, okay? And that's what I think the majority of these people who make minimum wage, they're young people. They're in households on average earning about $50,000 a year. These young people, you know, they're not the major breadwinner. They're the second or third breadwinner in that household. And I'm saying you're basically cutting the legs off from these young people as it is. 25% of minorities like me, like him, can't find a job right now. 25% of young people who are minorities. Okay, why? Because as you increase the minimum wage, you're basically increasing the unemployment rate of young people. That's what the statistics show. You increase the minimum wage, fewer young people are hired. Why? Because they have the fewest skills. Why? Because they have the fewest life experiences. Because many of them, frankly, are not worth minimum wage, and even at $9.32, because they're still working with Xbox 360s and stuff like that. That's their life. You're trying to transition from there to something real, right? But they're not worth $9.32. You increase it $15, you're basically cutting the legs off from the young people, the weakest in our society. We're getting jobs, and you're basically going to close businesses. Is that what you want to do? I don't get it. You look at Switzerland, one of the few European countries that have the lowest minimum wage, the lowest unemployment rate, less than 3%. They have no minimum wage in Switzerland. Why? Because people can earn what they're worth, and they get a job, and then they start moving their ways up. People who make minimum wage within a decade, they're at the top of the wage. They're in the top 20% of the wage scale within a decade. Why? Because they're not there. Minimum wage is not something to be permanent at. You're supposed to grow out of it. You're supposed to get additional skills. You're supposed to get educated. You're supposed to, put something back into your skills so that you can earn more. That's what it's about.
I think that was well put, very well put, particularly for us starting a business. Show of hands, how many people here worked for minimum wage in high school or college or whatever?
Less than minimum wage.
Okay, and I don't want to embarrass you, but if I ask how many people are making minimum wage now, I don't think that many hands would go up, yes.
I did it for 6 years.
Yeah?
4 years ago.
If you own a
I
restaurant,
did
you
it
probably
for
could.
6 years. 4 years ago.
Thank you.
Can I just
Yes.
respond?
Yes, Craig.
So what you're talking about is not getting out, it's not being heard, it's actually trying to be squelched in this whole process. We're unable to get that voice heard.
Well, because it's so politically incorrect.
It's so politically charged that all we're hearing is this has to be $15 an hour, this is going to help the minority workers, this is going to help the unskilled workers get more money, this is going to help the college graduates. All of those have the highest minimum wage, highest, unemployment, and they're going to go higher through this process. And that voice that you have, that experience that you have, is being squelched, and we're not able to hear that. So we've got to get folks like you talking in this conversation. There's no conversation from business here. There's no listening from this process.
So how do we get to have that voice? And secondarily, when did we make the assumption that the minimum wage needs to be a living wage? I agree with him. I am on the verge of hiring employees, and I have no intention of paying them $9.32 an hour. But I'm thinking of paying them like $11 or $12 an hour. If the minimum wage is $15, we're just collapsing the bottom rung. Why minimum wage shouldn't be a living wage?
I think, yes, sir.
If the majority of businesses in the city of Seattle are small businesses, how is it not being heard? Because half of the small businesses will collapse. And so then we'll have no business in the city of Seattle. We're trying to bring more economy into the city, and we're going to end up forcing people out of the city to live outside the city. You're cutting bus services, you're cutting taxes on roads, you're just going to increase the minimum wage, and increase the taxes to pay for the roads. Nobody's going to make any more money anyways.
Prices are going to go up, and people
Price, there's no more such thing as a $5 foot long, folks. It's going to be $9 foot long.
I see, sorry to cut you off, I see Lynn over there. Give me the sign. If we can just have a couple of very, very quick comments. Yes, sir.
Well, I haven't had any discussion about what the increase is going to be in the services that are being delivered. You might have seen something's going to throw in the stop.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get the public, you should start talking what's really going to cost. I mean, minimum wage is great, and I'm for it, but I'm also going to pay more to pay for that service. I don't think it should stop at the business level. And I guess I'd like to hear some discussion about that as we move this forward. What's going to be the impact on
the services that you provided to a business will push up costs as well. Yes, ma'am, and then Dave.
So just a couple comments. One of the benefits that I think I provide to my employees, I have a staff of 14 people, and that makes up about a little under 4 FTEs. But what I provide to my employees is a very flexible work schedule, a schedule that works around, they can drop their kids off at school, come into Dream Dinners. Some of them, they're all friends. They hang out at Dream Dinners, they work, and they're out of the door in time to pick their kids up. On my staff, I've got an IT consultant, I've got a Macy's manager, I have a recreational therapist, I have a, the list just goes on and on. A very qualified, most of them have college educations. They're not making minimum wage, they're making above minimum wage, but they're not making $15 an hour. If I have to pay my employees $15 an hour and then the lead people on top of that at that same, I will have to increase my average ticket 20%. So when Nancy comes in and gets her Dream Dinners, she's going to be paying 20% more for them. Or my salary, which I'm a registered dietitian. I worked in the university system for a number of years. I'm making the same now without benefits as if I was working in the university system. My salary would drop to $20,000 a year.
Story well told, thank you. Then David, and I know we've got to really wrap it up.
A quick comment, Craig. It is Craig, right?
Yeah.
I really appreciate your comment that we're not getting any concessions from labor on this. Okay, they're coming in, we're shaking ground saying, you're going to do it, you're going to do it. Business is going to bear the brunt of this. Okay, if they're not willing to concede a little bit, and if any other folks at the table aren't willing to concede on this, how do we get our voice heard? That's my question, is how do we stand up there and say, we're willing to bear our portion, but you guys can give something back to it?
Part of it has to be through groups like this, through One Seattle, through contacting your city council members, through contacting the mayor, and having our voice heard, through the media. All that is getting squelched right now. It's just, that side of the story is just not being disclosed.
The squelching, you asked the squelching. If you read some of the articles, some of the proponent rhetoric is far more captivating to report on. And that's part of what's happening here. Janet just handed me this, and I'll leave it up on the table. There are a number of symposiums that the mayor's group is holding that focus on either hospitals or transportation or the maritime. So there is at least a dialogue, and I would say a healthier type format for a dialogue, other than you've got 3 minutes of the microphone, make a case. There's a much different sort of a dialogue that is going on. So,
can I make one quick announcement?
Yes.
Councilmember Clark is convening a joint meeting of the Seattle City Council Committee on Economic Inequality and Minimum Wage, along with members of the Income Inequality Advisory Committee at Town Hall on March 5th at 6 o'clock in the evening. It's going to be a grand ball in the hall. And it's going to be the first public hearing, so we're expecting a lot of people to come. But from the council's perspective, this is sort of the first community question. I encourage you all to come to that meeting.
the one thing I will leave you with, and when I need to bolt, my mom would be horrified for me to leave a crowd like this so quickly. We went through the paid sick leave debate, and I really want to applaud the business owners that spoke up, because what happens sometimes is if a business owner goes, oh my gosh, this is going to be really hard for me, I don't know if I can afford this, they then get tagged and sometimes picketed and sometimes protested. And if you are running a bookstore, a nail shop, a restaurant, that can kill you. That can really kill you. So I would say for those who stand up, and David, I know you know this, it's a tremendous amount of courage to be visible and public and speak of that nature when there's sort of a social tide that has a different opinion. In sick leave, Cyrus the virus would stand in front of your door and people would verge off and go to a different restaurant if you took any sort of a public position. So we need to be incredibly careful about this because it's risky, but it's courageous.
We need to stand together though, because every other time what happens is they divide us. They're going to come and say, well, we're going to give 1 to 5s at $10 minimum wage. You're going to say, well, we'll give nonprofits at $10, but ultimately it's going to be $15 because you're not going to be able to get employees. We need to stand together on this issue.
And to add to that, you know, your employees who are making bonuses and commissions and tips, bring that story to the table. the minimum wage is not the only piece of income for so many workers in so many industries. And that's a part that we have to take into account.
So let me just support that with the fact that these symposiums, there's subcommittees that the IIC is doing. One of them will be restaurant, retail, hotel, so that's a place for your voice to be heard as well. I think that we as business community, and George pointed out, have for a long time been afraid to speak up and totally understand why, but this issue is too big. We all need to stand together and we all need to speak up, and I think we have a lot of positive things to talk about. We do really well by our employees, and we're being painted in a light that frankly is not us, especially in Seattle, and that needs to stop. And we need, as all Seattle employers and employees, come together and talk about and let the community know who we really are and what we really do for our employees, change the dynamic of this conversation. I know through One Seattle and others we're doing that, through the Seattle Restaurant Alliance we're doing that, but we have to. We've been for so long allowing others to talk about what it means to, as the employer of a Great Clips or a restaurant or anything small business. We need to start speaking up for ourselves. So.
And that's kind of a great way to summarize what kind of the initiative that we're trying to work on is to change the frame of how small business is being portrayed in just general conversations, and to do it in if you come and talk to us, you're not just going to get kind of negative react. You know, we want to come in and build a conversation with you around this issue, and so far right now, that hasn't really been represented, and we want to try to get there.
Thank you, Lynn. You have the invitation to be on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. Sorry it's after.
Thank you.